Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Soil Health for School Gardens workshop. This is our virtual version. We did have some attendees at our live workshop and that went really well, but we wanted to make sure that we also had information for folks who weren't able to make it to that event. So we're going to be recording this in 3 different sections. The first one is going to be soil health for school gardens, the 4 principles of soil health, I should say. That's our first section. Then we're gonna have another section on engaging students in soil health. And we're also gonna have a 3rd section that is native plants, native pollinator plants, and soil health. So please see those links to be able to get all the information that was offered at the live workshop. Who we are, I'm Denise Rowcroft with the Environmental Center. I run our Garden for Every School program, and this Garden Educator Network is both part of our program as well as part of the Oregon Farm to School and School Garden Network. And so we try to offer events throughout the school year, as well as emails, resources, garden grants, things like that. We are also partnering with the Deschutes Soil and Water Conservation District. Erin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Erin Kilcullen and I'm the manager of Deschutes Soil and Water Conservation District. And this workshop was funded by a grant that we got through the National Association of Conservation Districts. They have an urban and community program that allows grants countrywide for conservation districts. And we partner with the Environmental Center, and throughout planning this, we got Casey Ray to join and Basie Clapp, and they'll introduce themselves as well. Thank you.
I'm Casey Ray Christopher, and I am the author of the School Garden Curriculum, K through 8th Guide to, oh my gosh, I'm gonna butcher it. I'm the author of the School Garden Curriculum. I'm also working in special education at Sisters High School, and I'm a garden educator. And I'm really excited to be here to share, any tips about engaging students and kind of my passion for soil health.
Hi, everybody. My name is Basie Clapp, and I'm really grateful to both Deschutes Soil and Water Conservation District and the Environmental Center for including the Bend pollinator pathway in this Healthy Soils workshop. About a year ago, I started trying to establish and connect native pollinator habitat across Bend and all of Central Oregon, working with different agencies, including the City of Bend, Bend Parks and Recreation, ODOT, and as well as schools. So we're planting a lot of native pollinator habitat across our region. So I'm looking forward to speaking with you today. Thank you.
And before we get going, the reason why we put this workshop together was we felt like a lot of school gardens took a big hit during COVID and weren't used at all. A lot of schools will kind of get out in the gardens after spring break. And as we know, schools close down around here just before spring break. So with a year of no activity, it seemed like one of the things that potentially really suffered that I saw in a few school gardens was the soil. With nothing planted and no activity for a whole year, it seemed like this was a real good opportunity to just learn about what are the principles for soil health, how can we engage our students, and also how we could get some soil amendments into the hands of teachers to be able to give their gardens some love. So let me go to the next slide here. Okay, oh, this is our agenda. Don't to do that. Okay, guess we should have taken these out. So why soil health? Well, one of the slides that we had come across, which is a little bit different from this one, was that a teaspoon of soil contains more living things than there are people on the earth. Now we know we have more than 1 billion people on the earth, so we're not sure which one is accurate, but the idea that a small teaspoon can contain even 1 billion different bacteria is pretty fascinating. And I think it helps shift thinking about soil as this sort of dead dirt to living soil, right? And if we want to grow things from the soil, we actually have to take care of the soil. And one thing that I always think of when I think of working with soil in the garden is that a local farmer, he calls himself a soil farmer, right? Meaning his main job is to take care of the soil. And if he takes care of the soil, it's gonna grow the food that then sustains the community. And so it's really important that we take care of the soil and give that as much as attention as we do for all the stuff that comes out of it.
Yeah, and I would add with, really thinking about soil as a living system. So this isn't, yeah, it's not just a thing. It's not just this dirt. It's alive. It's full of these biotic and abiotic factors, but like they're all working together. And when we think about, whether like food production too, like the health of our soil and the health of that soil ecosystem directly translates into how healthy our food is. And so it's a really good to think about, is like that we're part of that system as well as consumers, that, the soil, it doesn't just exist there. Like we feed it, it feeds us.
Nice. And yeah, system. I think that's the key word, Casey Ray. So with soil health, there are 4 principles, and we've got a couple different slides that kind of go over them, but they are: maximize continuous living roots. I gotta move your head. Minimize disturbance, maximize soil cover, and maximize biodiversity. So taking them we're going to go through each of these one by one, and Erin's going to give a little background to each of these. And then I'm going to talk about what that looks like in the soil, in a school garden. Before we dig into each of those, there's another slide that I want to share that was just another way to phrase these. And that was do not disturb. So that's that minimize disturbance. Discover the cover, keeping the soil covered. A radical idea, notice the spelling of radical, keep a live root in soil as many days as possible. And then diversity is key. Feed the soil with diversity, diversity, diversity. So those are just other ways to kind of remember these 4 soil health principles. If these are not in front of me, I generally only remember 3. I really have to like come back and see them. So these things might help you do that as well. Sorry, I lost my cursor there. Okay, so Erin, do you want to kind of kick off each of these, and then I'll follow with mine?
Yeah, so why do we not want to disturb our soil? I think we've all heard a lot of debate on no-till or low-till, and so what does that actually mean? So you want to minimize the disturbance so that we can rebuild our soil aggregates, pore spaces, soil glue, and organic matter. So if you're tilling and disturbing the soil, you're reducing and you're removing pore spaces. And in these pore spaces is where air and water exist. And that restricts infiltration and will destroy the biological glue, which holds the soil together. So minimal disturbance will just create a healthier soil for everything that you're planting. And then another thing that we were talking about at the workshop was cutting plants at the base in the fall and then putting mulch in place. We were able to put some manure on a school garden at our workshop, which is really great to see everyone working together. And then also you want to leave the perennials for the bugs in the winter time.
Yeah, so how this looks in a school garden, minimize disturbance. What you might do in your personal backyard might be different from what you do in a school garden, because you have other things to keep in mind, right? So in our learning garden at the Environmental Center, for annuals and things that don't look good when they're dead, I cut them at the base. And you can see on the top right, or on the bottom right, those were some sunflower stalks. And then the top right, you can see that's where we cut them off at the base, but we left the roots in the ground. So by leaving the roots in the ground, they will eventually die off. But right now, they're living roots, and there's a ton of microorganisms feeding off of those roots. So that is how I'm minimizing disturbance to the soil. I'm just cutting off what's above. Now I do that with plants that are like my annual veggie plants, as well as things that don't look nice, like I said. And eventually the sunflower stalks get really craggly looking, right? So I cut those back. Now on the bottom right, you'll see this blanket flower. And on the left, you'll see that's it in full bloom. And right next to that, it's a really beautiful plant in the fall and in the winter as well. Now there's a lot of plants that will kind of stay upright. And so by keeping them there, you're disturbing the soil you're not disturbing the soil at all. You're minimizing it by not pulling it out, but also you're creating that pollinator friendly habitat. And Basie will talk more about that in her section. When I will maybe cut that back is when I see that it doesn't look that great, and it's sort of that balance between like, it is a public space. And so at some point I might be like, okay, snow now kind of fell on that and it's laying flat and it really doesn't look good anymore. And I might cut it back, but I still won't like pull it out of the ground. Basically nothing will I pull out of the ground directly unless it's a weed. Okay, next slide for Erin.
So this, the second principle is maximize soil cover. And so what does that mean and how do we maximize the soil cover? So the top few inches of the soil, they contain the highest abundance of microorganisms, organic matter, and soil nutrients. And so to preserve that, you really want to cover the soil with either mulch, manure, cover crops, compost, leaves. And then this will also prevent erosion. It'll add more organic matter into the soil. And also maximizing soil cover will help from raindrop splash that could also splash onto the leaves or other plants, and that could spread pathogens and decrease the soil content.
Yeah, I do a little plug in here for
In the school, yeah.
Oh, sorry, please. Yeah, I was just kind of connecting the previous idea of like minimizing disturbance, kind of cutting the plants down and leaving the roots, with minimizing soil cover as well, is that they both of these practices, yeah, like you said, like Erin, like really minimize erosion and erosive kind of seasonal changes. So heavy rains or, you know, even sometimes like deep ice, you know, and then we get here really deep colds and winds. Like the roots are so good about holding onto that soil as well, just to like in all of their little particles, and then also like covering over those maybe cut down roots, like really will keep the soil where it's at. You know, it's going to be less erosive to wind or water. It's just going to create like a very, I don't want to say compact, but just a very solid system. So that was just my thought.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Casey Ray.
Good.
I
have to apologize because I forgot to mention that I have to go back to school. I have to go back to work.
We appreciate your input.
Yeah.
I'm sorry you can't stay for this whole.
Yeah. Sorry I can't geek out on cover crops with everyone, but thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Casey Ray.
Oh yeah. Casey Ray, can you give your email if people have cover crop questions?
Yes. It's just my name, casey.ray.christopher@gmail.com.
Okay.
I
Thank
love
you.
geeking out on it, so please let me know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we do, speaking of cover crops, we do have them, they're mentioned in like 3 out of the 4 soil health principles. So we will go a little to specifics later on, but I did want to say that next to straw, I added in hay is for horses, because that was personally a lesson that I learned from a teacher after I bought a hay bale and spread that as my covering the garden. And then the next spring, I just had grasses come up everywhere. And that's when a teacher said, Denise, hay is for horses, you want straw. So I like to point that out. So yeah, in the school garden, ways that we cover are, the biggest lesson I got from a friend who was an arborist. He used wood chips because he's like, well, that's what I have. If you have a lot of leaves nearby your garden, great, you can use leaves. We had 1 bale of straw, not hay, straw, that has lasted for years. It doesn't really break down, so it works as a great cover. And then we kind of gather it up and put it in, we have like extra compost bins because people donate them to us all the time. You can just put it in a pile as well. But the compost kind of keeps it neat looking and contained. And then you know, growing season, we pull that out again and we're covering it everywhere. So you can see on the left here, we have an example of straw covering one of our beds. And those golf clubs, those were trellises for beams. That's what that is. So the squash plant there, when eventually we were sort of done, it wasn't growing anything anymore. That's one of those things that once the frost hits, It just doesn't really look very good. So again, we begin by cutting it so that the roots are still undisturbed, but then we take advantage of all the vegetation above ground. And if you have the student power and you have enough pruners, you can sit there and chop up those leaves and those stems in place. So instead of clearing everything out and then maybe paying for it to be composted elsewhere and then buying compost to put back on your beds, you're kind of taking advantage of the organic material that you already have. So the disadvantage here is that it does take time and it does take people. So if you can do that, great. If you can't, that's okay. My one exception to this is if the plant is diseased or has aphids or anything like that, I would take those leaves and stems and either compost them offsite or put them in the trash. I would not cut them up in place because then you're keeping that pest right there. And the other main reason that we also cover the soil, especially during the growing season, and I think part of this that I've taken into account is really covering the soil all year long. So during the growing season, the main thing for me is that water conservation, and that straw or leaves or whatever can really shade the soil so that when it's getting watered, it's going through and it's really shading the soil so that the moisture stays in the soil where we want it for the plants. And then in the winter time, it's also like still keeping that moisture in. So it's like, you know, evaporation is less of an issue, but I feel like it keeps the soil warmer. It keeps things protected. And so it's kind of a year-round thing of covering the soil. Okay, next slide.
So the third soil health principle is to maximize continuous living roots. So the roots of vegetables, plants, whatever you have in your garden, they're really great at nourishing microbes. They provide food source, they release nutrition into the soil. They also help maintain growing planted roots for much of the year as possible. So that it also will stop weeds from coming through if you have maximize continuous living roots in your soil. And ways that you can do this is you can use perennial crops, cover crops again. You can use crops relay or tight crop rotations. And then you can also use living mulches for weed control, like we were talking about in the last section. So crops relay we'll talk about in a little more detail coming up.
So in the school garden, I learned a few years ago that the more perennials I have, the less planning I have to do every spring about what gets planted where. So that's another advantage of having things that are, you know, continuously planted because they're perennial. That's less space that you have to figure out, you know, what goes there. So for example, we've got a bunch of herbs. We have berries, for example, goji berry. We have a butterfly garden and a bee garden, and those of course have a bunch of perennials. So those are, you know, they're covering the soil, they're growing in the soil year round. And then I guess I'll just talk about the crop relay on the, I think on the next one. Or maybe after that we go to the fourth one. Cover crops. So Casey Ray is a real very knowledgeable about cover crops, and she was the one who recommended this blend. And because it comes up in like 3 out of the 4 principles, the way I've used it in the school garden in the past is I kind of do this crop rotation where for the front 7 raised beds in the environmental center learning garden, one of them will just always be a cover crop. And so I've previously thought about it in terms of during the growing season, taking one bed like out of production and having it be cover crop, so that every year it's rotating through. And I think of it as like, instead of that garden bed providing for us, we're letting the plants like nourish the soil. So it's like a reverse relationship. After having learned more about these soil health principles, I'm now more like, okay, all year long cover crops. So one of the things that came up in the live workshop was, well, when do we do it and what? And basically what we kind of collectively came to the conclusion that let's not overthink it. Just put some cover crop down. Maybe it'll start, and then maybe it'll get frosted out before it really takes hold. Maybe it's a mild winter and it will take. And this is what I love about school gardens is they're learning gardens. And so basically there is no failure. If you scatter cover crop seeds with kindergartners, which is a great thing to do with littles because you can just scatter them, you can broadcast them and you don't have to be very specific about it. And let's say nothing comes up. Oh, well, we did it too late in the season, or it was a really harsh winter or whatever it was. Let's try it again a month later. Let's try it again early spring and see what happens. I've also found that when I plant things in the fall, early winter, I have not really expectation that it's going to come up. However, what does sometimes happen is it's the first thing to come up in the spring. And maybe it comes up before I'm really ready to work with students in the garden. And so it is, number one, it's an indicator that soil is warm enough to start growing. And number two, it might be giving a chance for some restoration for that garden bed as well. And maybe you decide, hey, cover crops are coming up here. I'm actually going to let that just be a cover crop section or bed for the season. So we found that this was a really good blend. This Renee's Garden was a blend of winter rye, hairy vetch, fava bean, and Austrian winter pea. And fava bean, I haven't grown much of, but school gardeners around Oregon have really been pumping me up on fava bean in that it's just a really great educational plant because you've got all cycles of the plant happening at the same time generally, and also it's really good for the soil and you can also eat it. So it's like multi-dimensional. And I know people can get this online, but in Bend, it was also available at a garden store. Was it Green Leaf?
It was at Green Leaf, which is located at Wilson and 9th.
Okay. So the last, the fourth principle of soil health.
Yeah, so the fourth one is maximize biodiversity. And this has lots of benefits. I think just in general, I think it's a great opportunity to combat biodiversity at a local level. So school gardens, every garden around the world, Oregon, locally, it's a great opportunity to really reap benefits at a local level. It's a great time to increase habitat for insects, pollinators, and even wildlife and birds. It also helps to make the system more robust and able to withstand stress and diversity. It improves soil health by ensuring that the food and energy chains consist of several different types of plants and animals. So yeah, it has lots of benefits, and ways that you can maximize biodiversity is, again, crop rotation, perennials, native pollinator plants, and obviously different vegetables, however your garden wants to move forward.
And one of the things that I liked as a tagline on one of those earlier slides was that diversity above ground equals diversity below ground. And that's something I really hadn't thought about before. So one thing I've been doing a little bit more in our beds this year, these are a little bit hard to see in the picture, but on the one on the left, that bed was our roots bed. So we're growing carrots and beets there. However, we were donated some extra plants, and in there in the front left, you can see there's some little jalapeno peppers. So we had some extra jalapeno peppers and some extra parsley. And so I basically just looked up, like, what do they complement? What do they grow well with? And carrots was one of the things that was mentioned. So that was just like a quick Google search. So we put them there. And so it added diversity to that bed that otherwise only had two things in it. And the other thing that I learned from another school garden educator was that when you think of that companion planting, I mean, that's like a deep rabbit hole that you could get into. But what she was saying was, well, think about it like if you're just adding a little bit of diversity, like for instance, these peppers, the ones that I'm growing in the greenhouse, I'm growing for the peppers, but here I'm growing more for them to help these other plants. And so it's more just about the diversity and less about like the production of that thing here in this bed, if that makes sense. This plant on the right, this is our leafy greens bed with something really going to seed. We had a bunch of other marigold flowers in here and cabbage and chard and broccoli. And so just trying to keep, again, like diversity above ground, equaling that diversity below ground. So you can think of this like in each bed being diverse, and then as well as like stepping back and looking at the whole garden of like, do I have pollinator plants? Do I have perennial plants? Do I have native plants? Do I have annual plants? Do I have annual edible plants as well as perennial edible plants? And really just seeing like the stepping back and seeing the whole picture. One learning I had, just to connect back to that companion planting, when I first started gardening with kids, because I had no experience beforehand, all the students and I, they designed their own beds using this companion planting guide. And they came up with some great designs, but then every bed was kind of similar based on the guide they used. And every bed had something that really liked it warm, and every bed had something that really liked it cold. So a learning from that was like just kind of having these theme beds that they could then come with diverse ideas in that, like roots, leafy greens, legumes, you know, thinking of like the varieties of plants that you can fit in there are really wide ranging. Okay, so crop rotation, this is another rabbit hole that you can really go into. And I would suggest, if you're not very confident on crop rotation, just do some research with your students. Because here's the thing that I found is I would see all different ones. And I was like, well, which is the right way? Which is the right way? Again, that's the beauty of the learning garden, is it's all an experiment. This is one that Casey Ray shared with us, and I consider her quite an expert. So if you haven't done crop rotation before, go with this, where in the bed that you plant legumes, after that, and keep track of what gets planted there, that's your roots bed. And then after that, that's your fruits bed. And then after that, that's your leaves. And the way we do it in the learning garden is I have these student painted wooden signs, and it just says roots bed, leafy greens bed. And then and I leave them in. Sometimes I leave them in throughout the winter. And in the spring, I'm like, okay, rotate it over. And now I know what goes there. And one more thing about crop rotation is, on an earlier slide, crop relay was mentioned. And what that is when you're planting one thing and it's done, for instance, radishes, that's something you can plant early spring and hopefully harvest before school is out. Well, now you have just soil in your bed. And if you're not going to be utilizing it over the summertime, that's an opportunity to then plant it with cover crops, or to then plant it with carrots or potatoes or something that will grow over the summertime and be there for harvest time, really whenever you are ready to harvest it in the fall. So that is kind of what crop relay is. So soil health amendments, do you want to hit this, Erin, or do you want me to?
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about soil health principles and how do we continue to make our soil healthy year round, and some options are soil health amendments is what they're called. And this is what you'll be putting on top of the soil throughout the year. So you can use compost, shredded tree bark. Peat moss is definitely, I think, has some controversy. So I think if you wanted to go that route, maybe do some more research. I know that might be using, I'm not sure of all the details of that, but wood ash is also an option. Manure is a great option, and leaf molds on there. And then we also put together where to get these amendments throughout Central Oregon. So here's a list of all kinds of garden centers in Bend, Redmond, Tumalo, and Sisters. And I'm sure that there's a lot more throughout the county as well.
And one thing that I'd add is a lot of times it just comes down to like, well, what can you afford, or what do you have access to, or what is being donated? And so, there's a lot of options to like try at different times as well, and see also what works best for the microclimate for your garden. And wood ash, that's something that was up here and we had some questions about. I personally have never used that. you know, I've heard that it can make soil really acidic. So I don't really have an answer for that, but that's, go ahead and experiment and let us know what happens.
Yeah, and so I'll talk about this. So the manure is a great soil health amendment, and the Deschutes Soil and Water Conservation District has a manure exchange program. And this is an opportunity where we're just kind of the middleman in this program. So if you go to our website, if you click this first link, the manure exchange program, that'll take you to our website. And this is an opportunity to connect farmers that have excess manure to local gardeners, or anyone that wants to start a garden throughout the county. And there's a whole list on that page of providers. And so they're throughout all of Deschutes County: Lapine, Redmond, Sisters, Bend, Tumalo, Terrebonne. And these are people that you can, it has their phone numbers, their emails, their names, their location. And so this is a storing house for you to be able to contact this landowner, and you can ask them questions about their manure, and then it would be between your opportunity to work with them of delivery. So we do not provide delivery at this time. That would be something I would love to move forward to in the future. And then we also have a manure exchange Facebook group. So yeah, go check it out. We actually got to use this manure exchange program at our in-person workshop, which was really great. We had a Redmond landowner that had horse manure, and he was able to drop it off at the school that we were able to spread on the garden bed. So there is a great opportunity to get free drop off as well. So, and if you have any questions, just contact us on our website.
Thanks, Erin. Well, we can't take any questions about soil health right now. So just want to say thank you to everyone who's tuning in over time, and our contact information I'll be sure to put with this recording so that you can follow up with questions with Erin at the Soil, Water, and Conservation District, or myself at the Environmental Center, or Casey Ray with the School Garden Curriculum book, in case you have any follow-up questions. And be sure to check out the 2 other videos. Thanks
Thank
so
you,
much.
everyone.